key to understanding Bugatti cars is to look at the background of the family. Carlo Bugatti, he was an artist. He's famous for silverware, furniture. Most of the pieces have a strong form. They might be egg shapes or cubes or spheres, and then they're decorated with fine detail so that the surfaces have a richness that was an absolutely vital part of the design. Carlo's design ideas seem to have repercussions that go down through the family. He had two sons. The first was Ettore, and the second was Rembrandt. Rembrandt, from a very young age, showed terrific talent in sculpture. He was very prolific. Ettore would have been imbued with the artistic atmosphere of the family, but he may have been a little overfaced with the obvious terrific talent of his brother, and he became more interested in mechanisms and machinery, and Ettore became a pioneer machine designer, motorist, racing driver. He worked for Brunetti Stucchi. They produced racing tricycles and bicycles and so on. In 1902, Ettore managed to arrange an amazing contract with de Dietrich to produce a series of cars. He was particularly interested in the racing side of it, and possibly he neglected the development of the touring cars. In any event, the de Dietrichs fell out with Bugatti. But in 1909, he had the opportunity to set up on his own in Molsheim, in Alsace. The prototype car was the Type 10, which was a miniature, high-quality machine.
This is the Bugatti Type 15 Fiacre, which was built in 1912. In 1910, the Type 13 went into production. The Type 13 had a short wheelbase. The Fiacre, Type 15, had the medium wheelbase, which was very similar in its spirit and concept to the Type 10. And it's got an 8-valve engine, 1.3 litre, and we call it the happy car. Ettore Bugatti designed this car having been so fascinated by postcoaches and horse-drawn carriages, and he had a real passion for horses, so I think you can see it in the whole design. What's special about this car is that Ettore Bugatti built it, obviously with the idea of manufacturing several of them. What happened is that he built this one, I'm not aware of a second one, and kept it in the family. Some people say that he designed this car also having in mind that his wife could go shopping in it. I'm not sure that's true. You can take it at any pace you want. It will go up hills. It's got a lovely gearbox, and you just feel very, very safe in it. Even though you might think, because of the size of the wheels and the height of the coach, that you'd feel a bit wobbly going along country lanes, but you don't. You just feel really cozy and protected in it. The reason why I'm into Bugattis in such a major way, I think for a start I didn't have the choice. The first thing I've known was being on Bugatti rallies with my father, and he'd always take me everywhere with him. Age 4 or 5 I'd be doing a rally with him, which was complete bliss. One of my happiest memories with this car was driving on the roads in south of France, because the roads are quite steep, and we can't exactly hill climb with this car, but you certainly get a good impression. And in the middle of the summer with all the windows down, you'd just be in the middle of nowhere, somewhere up in the hills, and you'd have huge yellow butterflies cruising through the car whilst you're driving, which is quite surprising. And you can just stop anywhere, go for a wander. And it's a car which doesn't disturb nature, because it looks like a huge yellow flower cruising around.
The first Bugattis had a square, angled shouldered radiator, but the first car with the famous egg-shaped Bugatti radiator was the 1910 Prince Heinrich Trials car. The motif of the radiator was of vital importance for the identity of any car manufacturer in those days. After the war, Bugatti was ready with a 16-valve version of the small 4-litre car, and he entered a team of cars in the 1920 voiturette race at Le Mans and won. That really put Bugatti on the map. In 1921, the cars came in first, second, third and fourth at the race in Brescia in northern Italy. For racing, the car evolved through a series of body designs. This famous car is known as the cigar, with the circular section and the pointed tail with the exhaust coming out of the orifice at the end of the tail. After this car was the Type 32, the tank, which had an airfoil section body. It may have produced some aerodynamic lift, and apparently it was difficult to handle. In 1924, for the French Grand Prix at Lyon, Bugatti produced his masterpiece. It was the Type 35.
I don't know another car that people think of as a Grand Prix car like they think of this one. Bugatti was an enthusiast as well as an artist, and I think he wanted to produce a work of art in the form of a Grand Prix car. Suddenly there was this car that was basically winning anything in its class. It is just excellence. It is the quality of manufacture that makes a Bugatti what it is. The blue is the French racing blue. That was used for many, many years. The English have the racing green and the Germans have the silver, but the French blue, and we think this is the nearest we can get to the blue of the French racing blue. And most of the 35Bs that you see are in this blue colour. Oh, it's fantastic. Fantastic to drive. It's very sharp. It's very quick off the mark. You can spin the rear wheels with ease. It's a very light car. The steering is very direct. The gears you have to get used to, but once you get used to them, they're very quick through the gears. Well, the gearbox is a little incontinent, I'm afraid. Yes, and it does leave its mark. But you just have to fill it up, you see, and keep it to a level. The other part, which is difficult from my point of view, is that the pedals are very close together, and you have to wear very narrow shoes in order to operate them. And going back to the oil, if you're not careful, if you get oil on the soles of your shoes, it can become quite exciting when you go for the brake or the accelerator. Because these are a racing engine, and you've got to get the plugs settings, you've got to get your carburetor, and you've got to get all the ancillary bits right. And when you get it right, there's nothing better.
In 1925, Bugatti entered the Targa Florio, which was a car-breaking race around the mountains of Sicily. People thought that the delicate little car wouldn't survive. It was a long race, very grueling, unmade roads, etc. In 1925, the Type 35 won. He won in 26, 27, 28 and 29. They were the golden years. Nothing could touch them. Bugatti was fascinated by the idea of producing the ultimate car. He designated it the Royale, the Type 41. It was very large, it was extremely refined, silent, 12 litres, proportions almost of a London bus, and he hoped and expected that it would be used by royalty. And in the Depression in the 30s, the French government commissioned a project for rail cars. Bugatti entered a design for this competition and was successful. Interestingly, he found a use for the Royale engine, the 12-litre car engine, which had been commercially anything but successful. And the rail cars were produced in reasonably large numbers, and they were very successful. Before the rail car, Molsheim was a small specialist car maker. But in the 1930s, it became, if not an industrial giant, a large industrial company. During this very intensive phase of development at Molsheim, as well as the racing cars and the luxury cars, there were the touring cars, which Bugatti produced in larger numbers. The Type 44 was a superb example. It was a 3-litre, 8-cylinder, beautiful machine.
I'd always dreamed of having a Bugatti. The white one is a Tourer, a Type 44, bodied by Portou near Paris. The blue one, again a Type 44, same mechanical, same chassis, is bodied with an English body by Harrington. It is an ash frame that is just covered with fabric, makes it very, very light. It's a two-door, a faux coupe because of the pram irons down the side of it. Cream car is, I think, particularly French, with very sort of flowing lines. The factory sold the Type 44 in chassis form. It then went to your favourite coach builder, and various styles got put on, whether you took it to your local carpenter or the best coach builder from Paris or London or New York. The chassis from the factory was a very expensive piece. For example, these, we're talking approximately £1,200 for a chassis, where at the same time Austin and Morris and Ford were talking about £100, £120 for a complete car with all its coachwork and seats. So by the time you'd finished putting your body onto one of these, you're talking in excess of £2,000. They equate, if you like, with today's supercars. The cars were made very much lighter than any of the other luxury cars of the period. So it made it a much nippier car than the contemporary luxury classics of the period. The Blue Saloon was owned, probably from new, by a lady called Cynthia Turner. She raced a Brescia Bugatti at Brooklands, and lived in Scarborough, had a garage in Scarborough, and she seems to have commuted to London or Brooklands or wherever every week, because she's reputed to have put 200,000 miles on that car before 1939, which must be rather incredible on the roads of that date. These two will both cruise at about 65-70 on a motorway, and if we press downhill following wind we can get about 85 or 90 out of them, which was a colossal speed for the 1920s and early 30s, where most cars were built to do 50 miles an hour maximum. There is a problem because the pedals are different from normal. The brake and the accelerator are reversed, which makes it interesting driving for those that don't know. But on the road, they're very, very easy with modern traffic, except it doesn't have a fan. So we hit the traffic jams and they boil. We're stuck then. Obviously a little screw or a nut comes loose every now and then, and half the fun of having an old car is to go and put all the bits back on as they fall off. But they're very reliable cars. I'm not frightened to take either of those two across the continent.
In the 1930s, Jean Bugatti was beginning to have more influence in the running of the factory at Molsheim. His father, Ettore, was spending more time in Paris. Jean was very much involved with the Type 55 Roadster, which is perhaps the most beautiful sports car that's ever been developed. After that, Jean's project was the Type 57.
This is a 1934 Type 57 with a James Young sports saloon, it was originally described as. Even now it's a surprising car. It looks upright and stately and perhaps rather slow. But when you put your foot down, it's got all the power and handling ability of a Bugatti car. And the blue one is slightly later, 1936. It's a Type 57 Stelvio, bodied by the factory at Molsheim. So it's very much Jean Bugatti's car, this, and I think it's one that he got entirely right from stem to stern. The blue one looks altogether different. It's one of the most exciting lines that has ever been produced on a Type 57 Bugatti, I think. Of course, it's a very personal thing, that, but I think it's just a wonderfully sexy car. If you look at the back end line of this car, it seems to be perfect. The car sold well. Especially for its price and the difficult times. It certainly achieved that. They were a car that I think were really made for the people who wanted to be seen in their cars, but also wanted something that was mechanically satisfying. It's always had this nice combination, I feel, Bugatti. It's something that artistic people can appreciate. It's something that engineers can appreciate. And it's something that dilettantes, the young, rich ice cream boys could really appreciate being seen in. I had a wicked uncle who had a very nice collection of Bugatti cars. I must have been 5 or 6 or something, and my sister was 2 or 3 years older, and we had our first ride at over 100 miles an hour in a Grand Prix Bugatti down the Cheshire lanes, which was probably a very silly thing to do, but So the name has meant something to me since I was very small, and I've always looked up to it as being the ultimate collector's enthusiast period car. I enjoy having them in good order, on the button, so that any day of the year, if the sun comes out and I feel like it, I can just get in and go for a bit of a burner. But I think that I've got over the sort of ego-boosting side of it now, and I feel quite at home driving these cars around.
In 1939, the Type 57G tank version won at Le Mans. After the race, Jean Bugatti was testing one of the cars near Molsheim, and there was a fatal accident. He was killed. He had been such a key figure in the production and development and design at the factory that his death was really the writing on the wall. Ettore Bugatti continued his design work in Paris, and after the war it was hoped that he would set up production again. There were all sorts of projects from his drawing board, but in the event little happened, and really it was the sad end. In the 1980s, the trademark Bugatti was bought by an Italian consortium, and they set up in Campo Galliano to produce super sports cars.
Unfortunately, the whole project ran into financial difficulties, and at the moment we don't know whether this car will be produced in any numbers at all. But for me, really, I think it comes to quite a nice close pre-war. I feel these are the true Bugattis. They all built while Ettore was still alive, and for me it remains a pre-war story.
People who own cars like this are purely custodians during their lifetime, or until they depart with them. And that's all you can do, and that's all you should be able to do. But if you can leave your car a little better than you found it, well then I think you've succeeded.
It's a magic feeling that you're driving something that's 70, 75 years old, and it's moving along with everybody else. It's a great feeling being out in these pieces of antiquity.